Test, don't guess. We all know that. And we want you to test better. Valve Dynamo is a dynamometer specifically designed for MSK healthcare. It isn't a repurposed crane gauge or an inaccurate grip measure. You can push, pull, grip, and more. Plus, if that wasn't enough, its app for recording and storing the data is just brilliant. valvehealth.com/dynamo for the only measurement device you're going to need in clinic.
Hi everybody and welcome to Chewing It Over. I'm really pleased to have Claire Minshull with us today, and she is going to talk about whole body vibration. So Claire, could you talk to us maybe about whether whole body vibration is in the scope of S&C therapists or physios or maybe even both?
Okay, well, thanks for having me on. Always a joy. Is whole body vibration or WBV in the scope of physios or S&Cs? Well, I think really the question is down to what is it that you want to do with this technology? What is the adaptation, the application? And in a short answer, yes, it's in scope with both. So depending on who you're managing and what you're doing with it, it can definitely be used with non-clinical populations and clinical populations as well. So obviously there's a practitioner difference there on who you would be managing if you're a clinician versus non-clinician, but absolutely it's in the scope with both. As a short answer.
Oh, so this is exciting. It gives us lots to talk about. So anyway, for those of you who don't know Claire very well, hopefully it'd be nice to have a little bit of an intro. So would you mind just telling us a bit about you and maybe about how you ended up speaking on this topic, and just kind of fill us in if people may be a bit newer to the sort of Twitter sphere of therapy.
Okay. Yeah, so my background, potted history, PhD in neuromuscular physiology, translates really to kind of strength and conditioning, and research and scientific background in healthy populations and clinical populations. So my passion is understanding the neuromuscular system and how it adapts to stimuli or lack thereof. So all my research and applications have been with a clinical emphasis, even if it's not with clinical populations. So I've been an academic for many, many years, left academia, still research active now. So what I do and absolutely love doing is translating this evidence base that we have oftentimes in performance-based literature, not so much in rehab, into a rehabilitation environment, with the aim to try and improve rehabilitation intervention. So it's my absolute joy to basically share my knowledge with you in a practical way. It's got to be practicable, and everything that I do has to have that. Otherwise it's just nice to know. If you don't know how to use it, then arguably it's of no use. Just as I said, it's my blessing to be able to share my knowledge and experience with important people who make people better, feel better, do better. That's basically where I am. I also run a company, so I run Get Back to Sport. That's the vehicle through which I deliver this evidence-based rehabilitation, education and training to healthcare practitioners and rehab practitioners. I also run a company called Joint Approach, which is an online multidisciplinary program for the management of knee osteoarthritis. So we're a startup actually, and we're really blessed to have been working within the NHS, and I'm literally putting my money where my mouth is. So applying all these principles I'm teaching people to great effect, might I add. So and I do lots of other things as well, but that's basically a short version of who I am.
Yeah, and I think those of you who aren't familiar with Claire, I found your work incredibly helpful, and I've heard you speak live a couple of times, and yeah, it is just very practical, very down to earth, things that you can actually use in your day-to-day clinical life, rather than sometimes I think we've all been on the receiving end of going, okay, that's all very well and good, but I don't work at the kind of maybe the pinnacle of elite sport, for example, and some of it sometimes can be quite difficult to transfer. So maybe then, could you tell us how kind of, you came across whole body vibration and kind of what made you passionate to talk about it at Therapy Life?
Sure. So I first came across it, oh gosh, this is going back probably maybe 15 years ago. So in fact, my PhD student did a study on it. I was intrigued by this. So whole body vibration, what we're talking about really, we need to kind of nail that, don't we? It's the application of like a mechanical stimulus with an oscillatory kind of characteristic, i.e. repeated perturbations to the body, and whole body vibration is typically delivered through the feet, so standing on a vibrating platform. We're probably aware of it in other settings, which is possibly why there's a lot of skepticism around it, which is, the musculoskeletal complaints and maybe other complaints that occur through prolonged exposure to vibration, like vibration white finger being one in construction, and a lot of work has been done to minimize vibration. So we could well ask, why the hell are we talking about applying vibration? But that's very, very different to what we're talking about here. Whole body vibration type training. So it's an acute exposure of ideally a well-calculated dosage to then bring about an adaptation to the neuromuscular system or musculoskeletal system. So I was intrigued by it. It might even be longer than 15 years ago. And we did a study. So I was particularly interested in it from a perspective of, does it disrupt acutely sensory motor acuity? So at the time, these kind of plates were being pumped out, and you could see whole teams of rugby just standing on the sidelines on these vibrating plates, because it elicited an increase in muscle temperature, which is fine. But there was absolutely no investigation into whether or not there was any adverse effects, like, does that disrupt your proprioceptive ability? So if you're going to stand on a vibrating plate and then suddenly jump into an unpredictable high loading environment, is that a bad thing? So we've done a few studies, and they didn't disrupt that. But more recently, as I'm translating my research into practice, particularly with my career shifted from when I was very wet behind the ears, very focused on elite sport, ACL, so passionate about ACL, I did my own. But then latterly, it's more about kind of populations that are particularly compromised, and this would be load compromised individuals. So where you want to try and improve rehabilitation, so maybe attenuate losses associated with injury, disuse, surgery, or accelerate adaptations, but in these individuals who can't lift heavy stuff, right? So what have we got in terms of an evidence base and tools? So more recently, then that's emerged as for me as something that really does stack up as a real potential with the right populations, a potential adjunct to training with load compromised populations. So that's where I came across it, and I'm going to be looking forward to talking about that, to just explain a little bit more about what it is. We've got a lot of skepticism about it, particularly not just the vibration white finger, but we're seeing all these amazing devices on Amazon, these plastic little pad things that can shake cellulite off. And, this is ridiculous, isn't it? So it's cutting through all of that noise to deliver that and kind of highlight that evidence base to where we can, with the right populations, intervene with a whole body vibration stimulus to bring about neuromuscular adaptations, improvement in balance, improvement in strength, muscle cross-sectional area.
Yes, and that it sounds as loads of really good points to pick up on there. And I think maybe what will surprise some of the therapists listening to this is that it sounds like it's actually very relevant to our general population and not just to that sort of pinnacle of elite sport. So I've been chatting about this with a few physios today, and as a few raised is that, is it just those power plate things in the gym? Can you just stand on one? Can you just demystify what maybe special kit people might need for this?
Okay, so the kit's a really important bit, because it's just like with any intervention, you've got to know what you're doing. So what's the dose that you're giving, whether it be a traditional resistance training intervention or an intervention to improve cardiovascular fitness or flexibility or, cooking ability. I don't know. You've got to kind of understand what it is that you're delivering and how that literally lands within the body. What is the stimulus or the stimuli? What are the stimuli? So yes, in theory, you can just stand on a power plate, but it's going to be pointless, really, unless you just like standing on a power plate. And there's different types of devices. So the power plate is this, and those types of devices are ones that offer this vertical shunting motion where it goes up and down. And my personal preference is not to these things. And I'm sorry for those individuals that have a preference for this, because at those higher frequencies, it can be quite uncomfortable. So if you're standing on something that's going at 50 hertz, so that's 50 times per second up and down, if your knees are pretty straight, extended, then that propagates up the body and it can be quite uncomfortable in the head, right? Also with these devices that shunt up and down the whole platform, you need higher frequencies to elicit greater or similar, should I say, levels of muscle activation versus plates that side oscillate, which I always feel like I do an impression of somebody from Liverpool like this. When you stand on a plate, and you won't see that if you're listening to the podcast, side oscillating demonstrated by hands. So your left foot goes down, your right foot goes up, and then the opposite happens. Your right foot that goes down, and your left foot goes up, and that happens as a vibrational intervention, and that's a lot more tolerable, and also the frequencies that you need to elicit relatively similar levels of neuromuscular activation or muscle activation is less. So there are two types of device, and then you've really got to look at the evidence base, or I can explain that on the therapy talk. That again, it's, do you know what the frequency is? So it's just like if you think about putting an exercise prescription together, and let's talk about resistance training. What's the load? So the specificity, overload, and progression. So specifically, what are you trying to change? So with that patient population, are you looking at decreasing spasticity, for example, or are you looking at acutely, or are you going to try and improve muscular strength over time? So each of those things requires a different intervention. So are you going to train, conventional training? Are you going to train for strength? Or you're going to train for muscle endurance, for example, or something slightly different. So each one of those recipes, if you like, to elicit the optimal gains is going to be different for the different goals that you want to achieve. And the same is true with a vibrational stimulus. It's not suddenly magic. Again, you could just stand on a plate and go, I would like to, and then, have massive biceps or whatever it is that you think you want from that intervention. It's got to be calculated, and that frequency, that's equivalent to that overload. That almost, if you think about conventional resistance training, that's how I guess how the equivalent would be how heavy the weight is. So the higher the frequencies, the greater the level of muscle contraction. But also that then indicate, again, we'll get into this properly in the talk, but that then influences whether or not you're consciously able to perceive it and react to it or not. So it exploits something called a tonic stretch reflex, or the tonic vibration reflex, which is, if you do a tendon tap, that's the reflex that we're talking about. But because it's occurring so many times, it generates a muscular contraction, or it develops into tetany if you were to continue doing that. But at lower frequencies, then there's the opportunity of that signal to propagate to the cortex. You're able to sense that and then make some voluntary controlled movements to a perturbation. So that would be where you're training balance. So yeah, it's all about, kind of what the devices that you're using and what is it that you're going to be using it for. Then we can set up it becomes quite simple after that, set up a recipe to elicit that.
So actually, it also comes down to this health, like strength and conditioning literacy, doesn't it, for therapists? In that we're not
exercise prescription.
Yeah.
Really, it doesn't even have to be. Strength and conditioning is a great kind of, I was going to say buzzword, but it's not buzzword, is it? It's three.
Buzz
three
phrase.
buzzwords. Or hyphenate them. You can make them one. It sounds great, doesn't it? But what it really boils down to is exercise prescription. What is it that you're trying to change? And that's the same with whole body vibration, whether it be resistance training, whether it be I was just talking about blood flow restriction training the other day, across all sorts of adjuncts, if you like, and interventions. It's the recipe.
Yeah, and it's essentially, isn't it, it's almost like a cake, isn't it? And we're using all these ingredients to try and get the best outcome or the best rise for our patients. So I guess that's my baking themed pun for the evening.
I'm just imagining a patient rising. This is amazing. That was a levitate.
That would be quite something to see in the MSK department, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess this brings us on to who might benefit the most from this type of therapy or this type of adjunct, and whether you had, without giving your kind of talk away, but any feelings or any early thoughts on that.
So what I'll talk about is what it is, how it works, how we can put these things together, and then the considerations for different populations and a reflection of their evidence base there. So what we see with I suppose novel and emerging technologies, albeit this is not that novel. Galileo were the first kind of guys to develop this, and it got put into space with NASA to attenuate bone loss associated with zero gravity, and this is still used in that application. So it's not just the muscle tissue or the connective tissues; it's bone as well. But its translation into rehabilitation and into training has a slightly less of a legacy, if you like, or longitude, and what's the word I'm looking for? Amount of research, basically. And because it's new, and we've got all these different ways of, or relatively new, different ways of applying it, we've seen a great heterogeneity in the evidence. So how long people are standing on these things for, or what frequency, with what duration and what rest periods. And again, that influences which tissues adapt, how they adapt, if they adapt, or if they fatigue. So when we try and do these systematic reviews and meta-analyses, we probably see that there's quite a range of interventions used, which may or may not kind of generate a favourable conclusion to the question. So what we'll look at are some of those populations whereby it's got some evidence, and in fact, Belinda Beck, she's on Therapy Live as well. Amazing woman. She's just about completed her VIBMOR trial, which is looking at low intensity vibration on bone adaptive responses, plus or minus, I think, on top of the LIFMOR trial as well, or the high intensity resistance exercise as well for bone adaptation. So there's as I said, there's a vast array of applications. There's quite a big evidence base in the neuro populations actually as well. So what we'll do is look at those populations and show where it might have some efficacy.
Perfect. So sneak peek there for everyone to tune in. But if you want to find out about your specific populations, then you need to listen to the whole thing. So yes, before we end, should we, if we're working in the NHS, I appreciate not everybody is, but it applies to a lot of people maybe tuning into Therapy Live or listening to this, should we be persuading our supervisors and our team leads to come and listen to this chat to persuade them that this has a place in the NHS or not?
Absolutely, of course. As I said, it's one of many tools. So I recommended it just last week for one patient. So I was talking to a physio. Have you tried this? Because this individual is severely load compromised. There's obviously contraindications as well as with all kind of interventions. So it's one of those tools. And if you're dealing with those populations and you're able to see them, or indeed they are reasonably well off and they'd like to purchase one for home, then absolutely. In fact, just to note, over COVID, the sales of these things shot through the roof because all the gyms were shut. So everybody was wanting, in the healthy populations, let alone kind of rehab populations and neuro populations, individuals were buying these plates to make sure they didn't lose all their gains over COVID. So, it's got a lot of applications. So it will really depend on your patient profiles that come through the door.
Great. So I think we've probably, peeked enough into your talk without giving it all away. I certainly will be tuning in. It sounds really exciting. And yeah, definitely another one of those tools we can add to the toolkit to be using with our patients. So could you maybe just tell people where they can either follow you in social media or find you on a website, so maybe they can either hear a bit more about you or even book into one of your courses before Therapy Life comes around?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm quite active on Twitter, and that's at Claire_Minshull. Also on Instagram and at Get Back to Sport, similar for Facebook, and you can find me on LinkedIn as well. And my website is getbacktosport.com. Although it says sport in the title, it's applicable to all populations. So everything that I do has it's not just a sport emphasis at all, and oftentimes it's not. But that's where we see the bigger evidence base. So getbacktosport.com, more website. So have a look through the courses on there, and get in touch with them on social media.
Yeah, I can vouch for them. I recently completed a sort of women's health little peek on Claire's website. So they are great, of all different lengths and all different face-to-face and virtual types. So there's something out there for everybody. I guess just a reminder, do not miss out on your Therapy Live tickets. It's rolling around awfully soon. The Physio Matters team are incredibly excited. The schedule looks phenomenal. I think the hardest thing is going to be deciding what to watch at what time, because you're going to want to be in every room at once, I think. But please do get your tickets. They are selling really, really fast, particularly if you're not a premium member. Think about joining because those non-member tickets are absolutely flying. We look forward to seeing you there, Claire. Thank you very much for your time tonight. I've learnt a lot. I'm looking forward to learning more from you in later this month. And to everyone else, see you at Therapy Live.
See you there. My pleasure.
There are two things that all MSK therapists have in common the world over. They love free trials and also exercise prescription. So if you're a chiro, physio, osteo, or some sort of ostchirisio hybrid, then head to rehabmypatient.com/physiomatters now and get 3 months on us of the best exercise prescription software available.